Douglas.
Thanks, Susan, and good evening, everybody, whether in the room or joining us through the live stream. It is just great to have the opportunity to speak to you about Scottish Water's performance and update you on some of the vital work we're doing, and to take a look at how we're progressing against our longer-term ambitions and vision. And like Susan, I think it's just super to be able to meet like this in person after a 2-year enforced break because of the pandemic. But I think it's also really good that we can simultaneously reach out to people, to our customers in live stream at exactly the same time. And it'll be great to hear from you all, whether in the room or those who are joining us live through the course of this evening. The last year for us, and when we talk about the last year, that's the year from April 2021 through to March 2022, was really, as Susan said, another extraordinary year. Ahead of events, to anticipate what might happen, and then deal with the fallout from events such as storms Arwen, Corrie and Malik. And if you remember back to the end of 2021, parts of the country endured 100-mile-an-hour winds, which caused extensive devastation to property and the loss of electricity and communications. And for us at Scottish Water, that in turn caused problems at our treatment works and very regrettably interruptions to some customers' water supplies, for which I'm very sorry. But despite all these challenges, we continued overall to deliver high quality services. Turning to water quality, overall this was very good. But we did face a particularly significant issue last year in terms of the level of manganese in tap water in areas of the country where the extremely dry weather in summer 2021 caused some of our reservoirs to fall to previously unknown levels. And in turn, this very understandably led to significant numbers of contacts from customers and stakeholders when they could see discoloured water coming out their taps, and most notably in and around Lanarkshire. We're sorry to our customers who were affected by that, but we've reviewed that incident and experience in detail and identified the steps that we can take, including strengthening our risk assessment of raw water quality and further significant investment in our assets to protect our supplies from this in future. However, I have to say that providing assets that will be resilient to this challenge alone will take some years and cost many tens of millions of pounds. And this one example alone gives an insight into the scale of challenge we face as we adapt to our changing climate. Our overall environmental performance continued to be good, with 96% of our wastewater treatment works complying with all the licence conditions. However, we did have 10 of the most serious environmental pollution incidents, most of which were caused by blockages in the sewer network. And this led to the emergency storm overflows, the combined sewer overflows, discharging excessive wastewater into burns and rivers. And this is truly an ongoing area of challenge. And we do a huge amount, but we know we need to do much more. A big step forward in delivering further improvements will come through our Urban Water Improvement Route Map, which sets out our plans that we've agreed with SEPA, the environmental regulator, and the Scottish Government to invest a further £500 million in the wastewater system to improve our monitoring of our wastewater discharges and, crucially, the quality and frequency of discharges, enhancing the health of rivers and coastal areas. And that builds on over £1 billion of investment that we've made in that sort of area over the past 15 years. But the weather challenges we faced were a major recurring theme, affecting the work we do and our performance. And the unfortunate fact is that some of the unusual weather patterns we've experienced, I think we all now recognise are no longer one-offs or likely to go away. Rather, they're set to become more commonplace, with further weather records likely being set in Scotland and elsewhere. And when you think about our asset stock, our infrastructure, our 100,000 kilometres of pipelines, our thousands of treatment plants, many of those were built many decades ago. And many of those assets were simply not designed to work in the weather conditions that we're now experiencing. And extreme weather events that we used to classify as 150-year events are now happening much more frequently. And it's becoming ever more apparent just how much we need to improve our assets if we are to maintain the high-quality services to our customers, the people of Scotland, that they will rightly expect. We do all we can when we're faced with these challenges, and the operational response from our teams is absolutely first class. But no matter how good the operational response is from our people, that alone will be insufficient to safeguard future services. And therefore we know that we need to keep increasing the rate of replacing and upgrading our assets, as well as keeping pace with the impacts of our changing climate. High levels of investment in both our water and our wastewater assets will be vital. And while we at Scottish Water will work ever more smartly and efficiently, it is unfortunately inevitable that customer charges will need to increase to pay for greater investment to safeguard future services. Now, working smartly and more efficiently is a major focus of our major ambitious transformation programme that we've underway at present. And I'm pleased that that programme is moving ahead well, with a number of initiatives delivering real benefits, whether in efficiency or customer experience. One such initiative is Project Swift, which is Scottish Water's intelligent field transformation. And that project is transforming how we plan and schedule our work when a customer contacts us with an issue. Using triage alongside a new video tool, we're already diagnosing and resolving around 1/3 of customer issues remotely. The benefits of that: issues fixed more quickly and saving time, money and the carbon associated with far fewer physical visits. In the last year, we've also identified, and in some instances begun, many more transformation initiatives which will help us change, make us more efficient and deliver greater value and benefits for customers and communities. Indeed, it's transforming how we work that will help us play our part in tackling probably the greatest challenge of our time: climate change. Last year, we made steady progress on our route to net zero emissions by 2040. There's been further reduction in the energy we use and an increase in the renewable energy we generate from our own assets. But I'm particularly delighted to report that we're building even stronger relationships with our supply chain and delivery partners, who are so crucial for our work. And for example, through these partnerships, we're working together to understand how we transform the emissions associated with construction activities, helping to drive down emissions in our capital programme. And this is truly breaking new ground for our sector. And in these early stages, our focus has been on 3 areas: low carbon design, low carbon materials, and low carbon construction techniques. When we launched our net zero emissions route map in 2020, we knew that such a long-term plan would require adjustments to our approach to decarbonisation as we learn more and improve our understanding. For example, the last year has seen us prioritise the potential of our own land holdings for tree planting and peatland restoration. Like many organisations, we have faced and managed successfully supply chain issues relating to the availability of some of the critical goods and supplies that we depend upon. But also at that time, we've done a huge amount to make sure that whatever we purchase from wherever in the world, that it is ethically manufactured. Our work to further strengthen relationships with local communities picked up again in the second half of the year. The easing of COVID restrictions saw more top-up taps being installed at the request of local communities. And other initiatives such as our Learn to Swim programme, which we deliver in partnership with Scottish Swimming, getting back up to speed. And like this event this evening, many colleagues and I have begun attending community and public events to meet people, to meet our customers and speak to them directly about their experience of Scottish Water. We're also continuing to look at new and innovative ways to remove surface water from sewers. And that alone will be so critical to reducing storm discharges during intense rainfall events. And at the same time, we're asking our customers to do what they can to help in reducing the challenges that we have with our sewer systems. So our Nature Calls campaign was launched earlier this year to reduce the number of wipes being flushed into sewers, by urging people to bin them at home or at work. At the same time, it's calling for a ban on wipes that contain plastic. Turning to our finances, I'm pleased to report that we did well despite the inevitable extra incident costs we incurred with all the weather challenges last year. Our overall running costs were £15 million lower than planned. And that was due in large part to buying our electricity well in advance, long before market prices began to rise. And through our transformation, we'll continue to drive for savings across all our activities. The last financial year was the first of our new regulatory period that runs from 2021 to 2027, a period in which we aim to increase our investment levels significantly. Often when you look at regulated utilities in the first year of a new regulatory period, utilities can often struggle to maintain investment levels and may see a bit of a dip as they put new delivery partners and arrangements in place. So it's a real tribute to the people of Scottish Water and our delivery partners that we achieved strong investment performance, with our level of planned investment increasing by £160 million from the previous year. At £623 million, that planned investment was slightly ahead of our original plan, delivering benefits for customers, the environment and the economy right across the country. And our plan to further increase investment in future years in line with government and regulatory expectations will support our work to maintain and enhance water and wastewater services to customers, protect the environment and enabling new housing and economic growth. But increasing investment also means that we can support more jobs across our supply chain, including an expected 1,000 new graduate and apprenticeship places over the 6 years of this period. Now, to fund our investment, we're benefiting from increased borrowing from the Scottish Government, but we do need to increase charges to our customers. Charges for last financial year, so that's 21-22, increased by 2.5%, and that was an increase of 1.8% above the then prevailing level of consumer price index inflation, CPI. And at the same time, the Scottish Government implemented an increase in financial support for those people who were least able to afford to pay their water bills. And what that meant was that nearly half of our customers now receive some form of reduction in their water charges. Now, when it came to setting charges for this new financial year, 2022-23, we set those at an increase of 4.2% in line with the prevailing CPI coming into this year. And we were very conscious of the difficult economic circumstances faced by many people and businesses across Scotland. And yet we face a real charging dilemma in the years ahead. If we look at the situation facing us now and even over the next couple of years, the economic conditions are likely to be very challenging for people and businesses for some time to come. We need to keep charges affordable for our customers, and yet the financing that has been assessed by our economic regulator, the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, in their final determination of charges for this 6-year period, that is required to enable us to meet our service expectations of customers, to meet all our legal obligations, as well as the objectives that Scottish ministers have set on us. And we're therefore exploring with the Scottish Government the options for how we handle this dilemma most appropriately. 2022 is a really special year for Scottish Water as we celebrate our 20th anniversary. I've been privileged to be here all that time, and I'm deeply proud of all we've achieved over those 20 years. However, looking back, I can't think of a period where we've faced as many varied challenges as we have over the past 2 or 2.5 years. Fortunately, as Susan said, the weather impacts so far this year in Scotland have been more manageable than at the same point last year. But the extensive challenges faced by many water companies in England this summer, and crucially when you look at their customers' reaction to this, what that shows is that our customers too will rightly expect us in Scottish Water to be able to deal with whatever comes our way as a result of future events. And as I look back to challenges overcome, I pay tribute to the ongoing hard work and dedication of our people and others, including our delivery partners, who've helped us to meet those challenges and continue to provide vital services to customers and communities. Finally, in January, I announced my intention to step down as Chief Executive after 10 years in the role and 20 years on our board and executive team. It's been and continues to be an immense privilege to lead Scottish Water. But the timing of my announcement and the subsequent appointment of my successor will enable them to be appointed and to take up post ahead of the really important planning for the next regulatory period that starts in 2027. But in the meantime, I will continue to lead Scottish Water throughout this year and in due course achieve a smooth transition to my successor. We're now at the stage of the event where we welcome any feedback or questions about anything you've heard today, or indeed any more specific matters relating to you or your community during the Q&A session. In a moment, I'm going to be joined on the stage by Peter Farrer, our Chief Operating Officer, and by Alan Scott, who is our Strategy and Commercial Director. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm now going to hand back to Susan to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Douglas. And a warm welcome to Peter and to Alan. So to support our panel, we may also call on, because it's not fair if everything goes to them, we may also call upon members of our leadership team and board who are scattered here in the audience to respond to some of the questions. To ask a question here in the hotel, at the Novotel, please raise a hand and a remote microphone will be brought to you. Please wait until you receive the microphone before asking your question, otherwise we can't hear you. And be sure that, and that also helps people online hear you, but also please tell us who you are. Those watching this on our live stream, please submit a question on the chat option. And that are all of my, those are all of my instructions. So can we start? I have a couple of pre-submitted questions. I can start with one of those, but unless a hand goes up instantly, and if not, let me just get it going then. Good, thank you. And if your hand goes up, because I have to look everywhere, kind of wave or do something to get my attention. So this is a really important question, actually, that came in, and I'll read it to you. There is no monitoring of sewage discharge at the lower water of Leith basins. 8 of the CSOs there are deemed priority for improvement in the current budget cycle. What works are planned and when will they start? Will these CSOs be monitored for sewage discharge, and how will the data be shared? So that's a big question and a really important one. Douglas, could I ask you maybe to give us some background to begin with?
No, sure. Susan, it's a hugely topical issue in Scotland and indeed across the UK. As I mentioned just briefly in my remarks, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of money investing in upgrading some of our storm overflows. And to give you a background, these effectively are emergency release valves within our sewer system. So that at times of very heavy rainfall, when the total water coming into the sewers exceeds the hydraulic capacity within them, these emergency release valves give the ability of the sewers to discharge excess water into a local watercourse, minimising the risk of flooding properties or open spaces. Going back about 15 years, we started a programme in conjunction with SEPA, of focusing on the highest priority CSOs across Scotland. And the improvements broadly fell into two categories. There were those where we installed screens to reduce sewage-related debris being discharged from the sewer into a local watercourse. But there's also programme work to increase the capacity of some of our sewers so that the sewage could be taken further downstream to where it could be treated most appropriately. And the largest scheme like that we had was in Glasgow, where we built a tunnel on the south side of the city, about 3 miles long, 5 metres in diameter, costing us well over £100 million. Now that is a great feat of engineering. But actually long term, and with all the impacts of our changing climate, the real challenge for us will be how can we remove surface water from our sewers, some of the existing connections, so that rainwater can be stored on the land, on the surface, reducing the hydraulic pressure on our sewer system. So we've had a 15-year journey. We've invested over £1 billion, improving hundreds of CSOs. And one of the things that's often commented on in Scotland is that we don't have a lot of monitoring of our CSOs. And that was actually a very conscious decision between SEPA and ourselves, that actually the best thing to do when we were improving the system was to spend the money on improving the infrastructure and therefore improving the quality of discharges to the watercourses, rather than simply diverting some of that money into just telling us what was happening. However, we're now moving into a different phase, and it's absolutely right that we're now moving into a phase where we're going to be increasing the level of monitoring that we have right across our sewer systems, and we've now agreed the next priority set of improvements in the storm overflows with SEPA that will see us investing about £500 million over the coming years. And I think the particular question relates to some of those CSOs. So I'll pass to Simon to answer the very particular question.
Thank you, Douglas, and good evening, everybody. My name's Simon Parsons, so I'm one of the directors at Scottish Water, and I look after a lot of our investment activities. So today we are investing already to upgrade a number of the CSOs along the Water of Leith between Balerno and Collington areas. But there is actually a number of others, up to about 20-odd other discharges along the Water of Leith that we are investigating and will be in terms of improving those discharges. So what we've done is we've agreed with SEPA a range of improvements to be made there, and identified many of those discharges along the Water of Leith as priorities. And if anybody wants to know the specific ones on there or the specific locations of them, if you go to the Scottish Water website and you look on the website, if you look under improving urban waters, you can actually see a list of all of the CSOs that have been identified as a priority across Scotland. So for those specific discharges, we're looking at the moment in terms of developing schemes for them. But I think for anybody who knows the Water of Leith and knows it well, it's not going to be the easiest in terms of environment for doing large civil works. So there's quite a lot of work needed to make sure that we can plan and undertake any improvements along that area of work. So two other parts for the question. First, about monitoring. So any of the improvements we make on CSOs, when we put those schemes in, monitoring will be part of those schemes. So they will be monitored going forward once the scheme has been developed. And all of the data from that will actually be reported. So we've agreed I think by 2024, any of our CSOs that are monitored, that data will be available and accessible on the Scottish Water website.
Good, thank you. Yes.
Hello, yes, I was actually the author of the question.
And I was about to announce your name, which I failed to do.
No
so
problem.
You are Ian Anderson.
My name is
yes?
Ian Anderson, yes. Part of a small campaign group based at the shore in Leith. Can I just start by saying that we've had contact with, I would say, many officials, workers from Scottish Water over the last couple of years, and we've never been treated anything other than with the most extreme courtesy. and assistance. I think you've got some fabulous staff out there. Yes, I put the question does appear somewhat selfish and local. I recognise that. But I'm grateful to Simon for his reply. It has actually given us some cheer sat here. I will point out for those who don't know that the lower basins of Leith are effectively a canal. They are not a flowing river. It does not have access to an external estuary or wide sea because it's locked in by Leith docks. So anything that goes into those basins is going to have a hard time getting out again. So that really was the driver for this particular question. But as I've said, thanks to Simon for the cheering reply which he's given us. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, can I thank you, first of all, for the very kind comments about our people who you come across or who you speak to. I mean, there's nothing more important. We do our job and we hope we know what we're doing and we do it well, but we have to do it with total respect for the communities and the people that we're serving. So I really appreciate the comments. And what you're asking that is not, everybody is local. I mean, that's where, those are the things that should concern us. And actually the answer to your question has a much wider implication all over Scotland. So a very good question, and I hope we can continue to please you. So thank you very much. So are there other hands here? I have some more that were pre-submitted, but let me just see if anyone raises a hand. Okay, so this time I will remember to identify the asker. So this is Councillor Jack Caldwell. And he's asked us if the top-up tap program will be expanded, and if so, how can local communities advocate for or request their local green space or area to be considered for a tap. And before I turn to Brian Laroni, who's our Director of Public Affairs, to answer, I just want to say that I look for these wherever I go in Scotland, and I went into Edinburgh Airport just through security on your left. There's a top-up tap, and this morning, this summer, for the first time, I've always seen one or two people there. There was a whole queue of people with their empty water bottles, and I felt like I wanted to cheer, but I would have embarrassed myself. Anyway, Brian, can you tell us about the expansion of top-up the tap?
I can, and cheer away. That would be lovely to see. Yeah, I mean, thank you to Councillor Caldwell for the question. We're very proud of our top-up taps. So it's great to get the opportunity to speak about them a wee bit. We've now got 75 top-up taps in the ground and working, and the next handful will be operational very shortly. We're working on plans for up to a further 70 to go in across Scotland. We recently announced that our taps were used and saved the equivalent of 2 million plastic bottles, which is a fantastic landmark for us and our customers, indeed, to achieve, and we're very pleased and proud of that. If you want to know more about where our taps are, all you have to do is Google Scottish Water and top-up taps, and it takes you straight to a map that has the locations of all of them. And in terms of getting a tap in an area, we very much welcome recommendations from the community. After the initial 32 taps, which were very deliberately placed, one in each council area, the rest since then have all been very much inspired by community recommendations, so we welcome those. And in fact, over the last couple of years, we've had a total of 1,400 requests for taps in communities, which gives you some idea just how popular they are. If Councillor Caldwell, or for that matter anyone else here or watching, wants to add to the list, they can do that by emailing us at topuptaprequest@scottishwater.co.uk. And if you reference this meeting, I'll make sure that we pay particular attention to those ones.
Brian, thank you very much for that. Any follow-up questions there? No? Okay, good, thank you. So I have another pre-submitted question from Ms. Jane Hay, and a very simple but pertinent question. In recent years, water quality on our beaches has been underreported. Why? Douglas, you want to kick us off on that one again?
Yeah, it would be super. I don't know if the question in the room. I'm not sure I exactly understand the reference to being underreported. But let me again just give you the background on this. Clearly, in Scotland, we're blessed with an enormous coastline and many beaches right around the Scotland. But for a beach to become a designated bathing water, it's a beach that isn't just beautiful, it's one that actually has to be used by a certain threshold number of people, and communities can apply to the Scottish Government for their beach to be designated as a bathing water, and the government goes through an evaluation process to see whether that beach meets the criteria, typically based on the number of people using the beach, for it to become a designated bathing water. But there are many designated bathing waters around the country. And what that means is that SEPA, the environmental regulator, monitors the water quality on all those beaches across the year, and it is SEPA who publish the water quality results. Scottish Water has a really important interface, but it's a partial interface. So one extreme, there may be some bathing beaches that are quite close to maybe Scottish Water wastewater treatment works. And because of that, we will have very high levels of treatment. We might, for example, be subjecting the treated effluent to ultraviolet disinfection to kill the bacteria, so it doesn't cause any problems in the bathing beach. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are many designated bathing beaches for which there are no Scottish Water assets in the vicinity. And therefore, when we think about, well, what are the factors that cause pressures on water quality around a bathing beach and can cause downgrading? Yes, sewage-related elements is one aspect, but also it's to do with agricultural runoff, as well as discharges from private septic tanks as well. So as I say, Susan, if the questioner would like to follow up on the specifics behind their concern about underreporting, it'd be great to hear. But otherwise, it really is SEPA who are responsible for the monitoring and reporting of performance.
Simon, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to say, I actually spoke to Jane earlier on, so we had the opportunity to have a chat outside. So just if anybody is interested in finding out the data in terms of bathing waters across Scotland, if you just Google SEPA and bathing waters, you'll actually get a link directly into their web page, and from there you can find the data in terms of every beach, every bathing beach across Scotland that's designated as a bathing beach, and get the water quality data from there. So it's more about accessibility of the information. So SEPA team do a great job in terms of collecting the data all year, and it's very accessible on their website.
Thank you very much for that. Looking around the room again and saying to our attendees who are online, don't forget you can put a question forward. I've got a few more if you'd rather that I led. And I think the answer may be yes. There's one. Yes.
Thank you, and thank you very much for answering about the top-up tax questions. Really appreciate that, and I think the scheme's a really great idea. This question's on behalf of one of my colleagues who's also a local authority councillor. A regular issue that residents feedback to us and Scottish Water is about capacity and forward planning in regards to surface water drainage. You'll appreciate with the recent weather in places like Stockbridge in Edinburgh, there's been particular issues there. So in terms of a lot of the solutions, it's based on, I think, reverse valve taps. Is that the right phrase to use? But yes, it's basically the question is, what are we doing short, medium and long term to mitigate such flooding in terms of working together with local authorities to get drains sorted and things like that? Good
question. Do you want to kick off, or shall? Yeah.
I'll give a headline, a huge amount, but let me come to Simon to talk about the specifics.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And the incidents of flooding that you're describing are obviously happening in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and all across Scotland. And right at the core of this is actually the storms that we're seeing now are significantly more intense than things we've ever seen in the past. And I'm sure anybody who's, most people will recognise that from their own experience of it. So if you take here in Edinburgh, we have formed a drainage partnership, not the best name, but this is what it says on the tin type stuff, with the City of Edinburgh Council, Midlothian and East Lothian local authorities as well. And that's all about coming together to try and find solutions to deal with some of these intense storms. Now in Edinburgh, what we're really focusing on is how do we keep surface water out of the actual drains themselves. And we set out our stormwater strategy, which is really very much focused on nothing new into the sewerage system, and what's in there where we can get it out, we'll actually try and get it out of the actual surface water system, out of the drainage system, sorry. And this is a multi-year kind of programme of work which will take not just Scottish Water, not just City of Edinburgh Council, but many other organisations involved as well. So we're developing a big programme of work around Craigleaf at the moment, so part of the Craigleaf area. We're already doing some drainage work in Craigleaf, anybody drives through that part of the city. But we're also now trying to work with local businesses, the council obviously and others, to try and find ways to really take the surface water out of that part of the city. And that will actually go down to individual people's houses. How can we help individual householders reduce the actual surface water themselves? And one of the big benefits of this type of approach is we'll use different types of technologies rather than big tanks under the ground. We'll be using what's called blue-green infrastructure, which has a real benefit because it increases biodiversity. It's often very nice to look at versus some of the concrete structures as well. So multiple benefits from trying to deal with one of the real challenges that we face going forward. But very happy, if you want to have a chat about it, very happy to pick that up.
I take it you're Councillor Jack Caldwell? Yeah. So thank you very much for that question. That's obviously on a lot of people's minds. And okay, well, I've got another one, a really important one as well. We've seen hosepipe bans introduced in parts of England and Wales alongside record temperatures this summer. We've also heard recently that SEPA needed to introduce restrictions to abstraction licenses in some areas in Scotland. And the question is, what impact does this have on Scottish Water Services and your customers? And to give everyone else a break, Peter, I'm going to turn to you. Can you answer that?
Well, I'm mic'd up. I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Susan. So yeah, we've been very lucky this year that we haven't had to introduce hosepipe bans compared to some of our other colleagues down south, which you'll have all read about in the newspapers. Primary reason for that is that we have most of our supplies up in Scotland are impounding reservoirs, and we've been fortunate enough to have many of these all over the country, but also the foresight of some of our ancestors to have built some huge impounding reservoirs back in Victorian times, which have served us well right up until today. A couple, Loch Atron for Glasgow and the Tala Reservoir down in the Borders, as an example, with 40 and 50 kilometre aqueducts bringing the water gravity fed into the big cities. So a bit of benefit from that. But going to the specific question about SEPA imposing restrictions, they imposed restrictions in Fife, and it was particularly to the farming community who abstract a lot of water from the river. In this particular case, it was the River Eden in Fife. We don't abstract any water from the River Eden. I said most of our supplies are impounding reservoirs, but we do have a number of river abstractions across the country. River Eden is not one of them, so that didn't have any impact on our supplies to our customers. A river nearby is the River Erne, which we do abstract water from. We abstract water from that particularly in dry periods like the period that we've had. So we are taking water from the River Erne at the moment to augment the impounding reservoir supply that we have there. According to my resident expert here, the River Erne has never, it's measured, SEPA measure it on a gauge, and if it falls below a certain level on the gauge, they would ask us to stop taking as much water from the River Erne, but that has never happened. So again, we've been fortunate that there's enough water going down the River Erne for that. But I think one of the key things is clearly, we've talked about here, is climate change and the impact that's having. I just wanted to say that some of the things that we have to do to make sure that we don't have hosepipe bans, because as soon as you have a hosepipe ban, it's a very difficult situation reputationally. And some of the things that we have to do, and one of the big issues for the whole of the industry across the UK at the moment is leakage levels from a pipework. Now, we've done tremendously well in that over the last 13 years since we had 13 or 14 years since we had our first leakage target. We've reduced leakage from 50% in pipes back in 2007 down to just about 25% now. Now that is still a lot of water that's leaking out of the pipes. About 16 to 17% of that is from Scottish Water's infrastructure. The rest is from customers' own supply pipes, which connect to our infrastructure in the streets. There is always more that we can do on that to reduce leakage levels, but it comes at a price as well, because we have this thing called the economic level of leakage, where up until recently we have looked at that purely from a financial economic perspective, i.e. how much does it cost to let the water run away versus the cost that it takes to find and fix that particular leak. Over the last few years, carbon has been built into that. And so you're in a dilemma now where to go beyond that economic level of leakage, and we are currently beyond the economic level of leakage as we stand. So although 25% is a huge amount of water leaking, it is considered to be beyond the economic level. And to go further beyond that, it costs a lot more money, but also you need to expend carbon on that as well to find and fix the leak. So we're at a bit of a dilemma space there, but we will continue to drive leakage levels down as much as we can, particularly to prevent any hosepipe bans from happening. Some of the other things, looking at efficient use of water from customers, which the whole of the industry is doing just now, so we'll work on that. And also looking at water-efficient homes going forward. I was speaking to someone earlier and saying, and it picks up the blue-green infrastructure point as well, none of the homes that have been built have got things like water butts on them, for example, for watering gardens. And one of the things that frustrates me more than anything as someone who's been in the water industry is as soon as there's dry weather, people put on sprinklers on their grass. Now, I know it's a personal preference for people to have nice green grass, but a sprinkler uses more water in an hour than an average family uses in a 24-hour period. So it's a huge amount of water that's used. And guess what? When as soon as the sun stops and the rain comes on, the grass turns green again. So personal issue of that. But we're working on all of these areas to try and get that balanced.
Peter, thank you very much. A very good and full answer. And I just want to reassure everyone that the grass at my house is quite brown. And we don't own a sprinkler, because grass does renew itself. And I'm very pleased that I've got a couple of questions from one of our online viewers. So Ruth Plevin, thank you very much. The first question you asked is, what action are you taking to prevent pharmaceuticals entering our water system? So who would like to, I think Simon, turning to you again.
Thank you. So the question is in terms of pharmaceuticals entering the water system. So every time you have medicine, or if you take your tablets from the doctors, well, vast majority of that actually passes pretty much straight through you and goes out into the environment. That's a polite way of trying to describe what happens to it. So as a big part of that, and those pharmaceuticals and other chemicals actually end up in the water environment, and they're obviously, in terms of, will end up in the actual river systems themselves. So we do a lot of monitoring, do a lot of work with SEPA in terms of monitoring that. We're understanding what happens to those pharmaceuticals in our environment, and through our wastewater treatment works. But the bit that's really exciting here is actually the work we're now doing with the NHS up in the Highlands, and that's actually trying to change the prescribing behaviour. So can somebody who's prescribing, a drug, are they aware of the fate of that, and can they actually change their prescribing behaviour to reduce the impact on the environment? So the best way of controlling these pharmaceuticals or anything going into river systems is controlling it at source. So really good work between ourselves, NHS, Highland, and SEPA.
Thanks very much, Simon. And again, as we hear about problems, you keep hearing about solutions and trials, and that's really in the DNA of this organization, to try to find ways to solve it. Now, Ruth Plevin has asked a second question, and I'm looking at you, Simon, but if you don't want this, you can pass the mic. But the question is, on behalf of the River Almond Action Group, can I ask, where do you hope to be in 20 years on CSOs, bracket, like a near 100% reduction, close bracket, and will the roadmap get us there? Is it ambitious enough?
I may be slightly biased on how ambitious it is. The roadmap that we've produced, Douglas described it earlier on, is very much focused on kind of long-term, how can we reduce the impacts of the sewerage system on the rivers and beaches across Scotland. And there's a huge amount of work already done. So the water quality in Scotland, in terms of measuring it, is at a very, very high level. But there's still some issues, as we've heard, around what's called the sewer-related debris getting into the environment. CSOs have a really important role to play. They have a really important role to play as a kind of safety valve. If heavy rain, the rain that we heard, for example, in Edinburgh, gets into the sewerage system, it needs somewhere to go. And CSOs protect people's houses and businesses and the environment around, it's kind of the urban environment in terms of from any of those kind of materials coming out of the sewerage system. So I think that our route map is really ambitious. It's setting out how we're going to really transform our asset base in terms of monitoring of it, reporting of it, so really transparent about how it's performing, but also year on year in terms of improving and reducing the biggest impacts we have on the environment. What it won't do is it won't stop these CSOs being there. So they will still have a really important role going forward. This is not about stopping them. It's actually about making sure when they are used, they're only used under the worst conditions, and the impact they have under those conditions is as small as we can possibly make it.
That's very helpful. I think it helps people understand a little more when and how they should be used. So thank you for that.
Susan, could I just
sure, Peter.
add something to that as well, just to build on what Simon said, is that what we would hope to have is monitoring on our CSOs going forward. That's a big part of our plans, so that when these essential overflows do happen, our operational teams can respond to these rapidly before there is any impact on the environment. Because if you are blind to that, the impact happens, and sometimes it can be a number of days before we're informed about it. We want to get in the front foot with that, with monitoring, and be able to respond quickly and make sure that the impact is minimal for the environment.
And very consistent with efforts in recent years to monitor and gather data and anticipate problems and prevent them before they get too big. So that's really good to hear. I've got one other question I can put out, unless anyone in the room or online wants to raise a hand. No? No? Okay, so final question. We've heard climate change mentioned a couple of times, maybe more than a couple of times. It's on everybody's mind. We can all see it. Is Scottish Water doing all it can and fast enough to meet or to address this challenge? So, sorry, Simon. You'll have earned your dinner tonight.
So, I mean, this is the... So first of all, I think we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. And in Scottish Water, the impacts of climate change we see are the flooding we've obviously talked about, the droughts that we've heard about, and Peter's described some of the actions we're already taking on there. And then we're also seeing impacts in things of the water quality. So more algae in our water this year and last year than in previous years. So we do a huge amount of work understanding, monitoring how these changes are happening, and then building that actually into our forward plans. So we, for example, will look at different clients and what's the impact of those scenarios on the services we provide, and also how we respond better to those changes. But I think it's best not to underestimate, some of the impacts are very significant for us. If you think about a 4-degree increase in temperature right at the upper end of the kind of IPPC's version of what the future could look like, they have very significant impacts on all parts of our activities, from water we got available to supply customers, to the impact of storms on ourselves. And just encourage everybody, everybody in this room and everybody listening to this has got a role to play. Reducing their own consumption of water, thinking about how they manage water in and around their house, as Peter's described, but also thinking about things that they are using themselves and putting down the drain. Everybody has a role to play to help us and help society prepare for climate change.
Simon, thank you very much for that. I often think that having deadlines, net zero in 2040 or 2045, that is in the future, and we all salute that and say, oh yes, we'll do things. But actually, we will never ever get there if we're not all doing things and maybe challenging things right now. So in the question where it says, are we doing things fast enough? We hope we are in Scottish Water, but we hope all of us are as well. So thank you for that. And I now have another online question, this one from Carrie Gooch, who has a very interesting picture, but I can't describe that. Thinking about CSOs and the need to respond to the changing pattern of rainfall from drizzle, can Scottish Water encourage people to reduce paving and encourage soak-away surfaces around buildings?
100% would encourage people to do that. So I mentioned the work we're doing in Craigleith earlier on today, and a big part of that is actually trying to think about how we can encourage people to think about managing water on their own environment. Paving, using green, etc. are ways for it. So I don't know if Peter's got anything to add.
Yeah, if I can just pick up as well, what we are doing we're working very closely with all developers across Scotland. So any developers who are, for example, developing a greenfield site or a brownfield site, we work with them to minimise surface water that goes into that development through green, blue infrastructure. But also, as Simon mentioned, looking at areas where we can take surface water out of the system. So we are doing everything we can to encourage any new builds to have no impact.
Good, thank you very much. And that finishes all of my pre-submitted questions, and I don't see any more here, and I don't see any more online. So let me just begin to draw things together. I'm sure you'll agree I hope you'll agree, this has been an interesting and informative meeting with a range of issues highlighted and discussed. I continue to be very proud of Scottish Water's achievements in the face of ever-changing challenges. I know how its people, the customers they serve, and how they relish having opportunities like this to speak to customers and listen to your opinions, while also sharing updates on our achievements over the last year and our hopes for the future. And I think we've done all of that today. I want to thank you, those of you who've attended here in person at the ACM, and those of you online who've joined us. And a very special thank you to the team who put this event together, and I'm looking at a few of them at the back of the room. Huge amounts of work, I can tell you, and they've done a terrific job, so thank you very much. Finally, and this will be the first of many, I want to say one more thank you. Earlier this year, as Douglas told you, he announced that he would step down after 10 years as Chief Executive at Scottish Water and a good bit longer with the organisation. I've come to respect the contribution of every single person who works at Scottish Water, and none more than Douglas's, whose leadership, dedication, and wisdom has delivered so much to the organisation and to the nation. Douglas, thank you. And thanks again to everyone. I hope you get something out of this. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. We'll see you next year. Good night.